So let's look at the expense dashboard. As we explained earlier, there are different kinds of expenses. This dashboard will focus on direct and indirect expenses. All the graphs have headers and each header states which expense is visualized. As stated in the header, this graph represents all indirect expenses that you fold into the expense journal. You want to reduce expenses over time, and that's why a reduction of expenses will be visualized in green, and increase will be visualized in red. So for example, let's look here. In December 2021, the indirect expenses decreased by 46% compared to December 2020. In October 2021, the indirect expenses increased by 3% compared to October 2020. Now the dotted line represents the monthly average indirect expense. You've segmented your indirect expenses into different groups in the control panel. The next two graphs represent the expenses of these groups on a yearly and monthly basis. On the top of the graph, you can see a scale with percent points. Let me illustrate how to read this by using an example. Advertising and marketing made up around 31% of the total expenses made in September 2021. Subscriptions made up around 1% of the total expenses made in September 2021. Using this graph, you can identify which indirect expense group is consuming the most money. Now, if you ever want to cut expenses, it's easy to see where to look first. In the PubHub's case, it's clear that they are spending heavily on advertising, marketing, as well as company cars. These two indirect expense groups make up to plus minus 50% of the total indirect cost. In the PubHub's case, we want to see a detailed analysis of the advertising, marketing, as well as the company car segment. This is possible by selecting those segments in the following chart. On the left side, you'll find all the suppliers that have sent you invoices for advertising and marketing in the current year. You can read this graph as follows. In 2021, Etsy, Squared, CoStar, and Global Pubs made up 55%, 28%, 9%, and 8% of total marketing expenses respectively. The first part of the table shows you the monthly increase or decrease of the advertising and marketing expenses of the current year compared to the year you selected in the Compare To box. For example, in January 2021, advertising and marketing expenses increased by 80% compared to January 2020. You'll find the increase for the full year at the bottom row. In this case, the advertising and marketing expenses for 2021 increased by 56% compared to 2020. Now the table to the right will tell you if a certain indirect expense group is gaining in importance in the total expense mix. So for example, in 2021, advertising and marketing made up 28% of the total indirect expenses. This is an increase of 12% compared to 2020. Now here's a tip. Focus on the indirect expenses that make up a good deal of your total indirect expense mix and that are growing in importance. If you can't strike a deal with these suppliers, try to find suppliers that will, but don't sacrifice quality for price. You are the customer of your supplier. If you know you make up a great deal of your supplier's revenue, you have more bargaining power. Always make use of this position when you're in it.